Okay, so this is part 2 of my breakdown of the derivative use interview with Jen Soto. It's also actually take 2 because I forgot to plug my microphone in. If you missed part 1, I will add the link for that below so that you can go back and watch that after this. And of course, if you're looking for any other deep dives, there is a Maddie Soto playlist if you go to my channel page. And there's quite a few deep dives, lots of discussions on all sorts of things. So with that said, if you are just discovering my channel, if you are new to my channel and you've not yet subscribed, I would be super grateful if you hit that subscribe button. It is of course utterly free for you and it makes a huge difference for my channel. And of course it also means that you get notified of any of my videos as they are released. Now, moving on to this derivative use interview. A few people expressed their disappointment in yesterday's interview over the fact that the prosecutor really wasn't pushing things with Jen. He wasn't questioning things, he wasn't challenging things. So I just wanted to give a reminder that the purpose of this interview is to basically help them to be able to bring charges against Stefan for Maddie's unaliving. They also, in doing this interview, don't want to mess up their chances of prosecuting Jen at a later date. So while it may seem frustrating that they're not challenging her on her lies, not asking for clarification and everything like that, it's actually a positive sign. Essentially, it shows us that they are still, at the time that this was done, they are still considering prosecuting Jen. Because if she says anything in this interview that's going to incriminate her, that they haven't discovered for themselves, they can't use that when they want to bring charges against her. So they're being super careful. And as frustrating as it is for us, we sit there and think, I wish he'd asked this, I wish he'd challenged this. It's a positive sign. And those times when he seems to head things off at the pass, I see that as a good thing. That's basically him going, I don't want to discuss this because this is one of the areas where we're going to come after you, essentially. Now, on a side note, in terms of yesterday's interview, I believe I owe an apology. I have frequently made comments about Jen not attending Maddie's birthday and choosing to go to work instead. And someone pointed out to me that, you know, there's a lot of single parents who have to work to survive. And I appreciate that and I understand that, and I really wasn't trying to insult single parents or pass judgment on single parents. My point was more along the lines of Jen Soto never prioritised Maddie. It was always Jen or Stefan. And the point that I was trying to make was that she had only been doing this job for a few weeks. It's not like she had shifts that were solid, set in place shifts. She was doing training. So she could have, I believe, I mean, she's working for Disney. It's meant to be family friendly, isn't it? So to me, it seems that to be reasonable, she should have actually said when she was negotiating shifts and negotiating the job and everything, say, look, you know, my daughter's 13th birthday is coming up and I would really like to be able to be there for her birthday. I can appreciate that as single parents, a lot of parents do sometimes miss important things with their children because they have to work. But I promise I'm not making accusations against all single parents. All I'm saying here is that Jen never once prioritised Maddie. And that includes not making any effort to make it to Maddie's birthday. Okay, so with all that out of the way, let's focus back in on this interview. So where we left it off yesterday, they had basically been discussing this whole situation of Stefan heading into the bedroom to collect the dog and Jen claiming that she leapt out of bed because she didn't want the dog to pee on the bed because she didn't want to have to do a load of laundry. So with that in mind, let's just jump in and continue to look at this interview.
Now, do you go back to sleep or do you check your phone or do anything?
I think I go back to sleep. I don't look at anything.
In this period of time that you have been awoken by Stefan, do you hear or see anybody else in your household?
I hear somebody in the kitchen. I'm not sure who it was. I'm not sure who it was.
Okay. Could you identify it by size, like their steps? Could you identify gender by their voice? Anything like that?
All I heard was sounds of like cabinets shutting, like somebody in there shutting, like looking for something and shutting.
So I actually hadn't put a lot of thought into what she's saying here before. He's asking her about if she, while she was awake, after Stefan woke her, if she had heard noises in the kitchen. And she's like, or if she'd heard anyone else in the apartment. And she's like, yeah. And he asks her to describe the noises. And she's talking about someone opening and shutting cupboards or cabinets. And then she says, like they were looking for something. So she's not just describing someone, just the normal situation of someone being in the kitchen and making themselves breakfast or something. But she's being very specific about it's like someone was looking for something. That's kind of interesting. I think we know that by this stage, Jen is in protect Jen mode. So it could be that she was fully aware about this story of Stefan having tools out in the kitchen and doing stuff, and maybe she's trying to establish that while separating herself from it. Or it could just be something as simple as she did hear one of her roommates in the kitchen. It's also, when she says, you know, it sounded like someone opening and closing cupboards like they were looking for something. Could she also be using that explanation to explain the sound of perhaps someone was making noise as they were coming downstairs in the apartment? I can't even say the words, but you know what I'm thinking. I'm thinking Stefan, and she was in that townhouse with two other people who may possibly question noises. Maybe Jen is using that as an explanation for noises that she knows full well weren't someone banging around in the cupboards. I'd like to know your thoughts, what you think about that.
Okay. Now, if your daughter had been awake, would she come in and say goodbye to you before school or not? Just let you sleep?
she would have come by and say goodbye to me. I can't remember if this is one of the first times that Stefan actually took her to school, so I would have hoped she would have said good night, but I'm not sure.
This is one of the more disturbing comments that I've heard from Jen. So he's asked her basically if Maddie had gone and said goodbye to her before she went. Essentially, that's the question. You know, did Maddie come in and say goodbye to you before heading off to school? And there's a long pause before Jen answers. I think she's very conscious, of course, of the fact that this is a derivative use interview. She needs to be honest. And the thing here is that being honest means admitting that Stefan's actually never taken Maddie to school before. So you get this long pause, then she managed to get as far as I, and drags that out really long as well. She's stalling so much here. And then she's, well, I would have hoped she would have come by and said goodbye to me. Finally spits it out after all the pauses. And then throws in another another pause. And admits here, I can't remember if this is one of the first times that Stefan actually took her to school. So she's being, once again, quite devious and manipulative here, because she full well knows, we've heard it from other people, Stefan had not taken Maddie to school before. So of course she knows full well that this was the first time. But of course, by admitting that, she's admitting that she lied in the previous interviews, because she came up with various versions of how many times he'd taken Maddie to school. So she doesn't want to outright say, yeah, I lied, he's never taken Maddie to school before, so I don't know what the situation would be as to whether or not Maddie would have come in to say good morning to me or goodbye to me. So she's in a bit of a pickle here. And I think it's because of that we get what I believe is one of her major slip-ups, major bit of leakage. She says, so, long pause again, long pause, I would have hoped she would have said good, and she pauses again, good night, but I'm not sure. So in stumbling to try and reiterate that, well, she thinks that Maddie might have normally said goodbye, she accidentally switches it to good night. I would have hoped she would have said good night. Which goes back to the question that I've been asking for a long time. Did Jen even see Maddie on the Sunday night? I know we have phone data that says Maddie's phone was taken upstairs at 19 minutes past 11 that night. But it's conceivable, of course, that having been at a party all day, Maddie may have plugged her phone into the charger when she got home while she was getting herself ready to bed. And for all we know, Jen might have noticed it. If Stefan was downstairs, maybe she said, oh, Maddie will need her phone in the morning for the alarm, and he took it upstairs. We can't be certain if Maddie was the one that took her phone upstairs at 11:19. And we have those odd messages from Jen later, basically saying she needs to go to bed now. Not telling Maddie that, telling Stefan that. So her saying, I would have hoped she would have said good night, To me, that's a little bit of a red flag. I think it is guilty leakage. I think it's really interesting, and I think it is possibly important. And I think that in terms of the original question, would Maddie have gone in to say goodbye to you before she went to school? I think there's more to that, and that in actual fact, he was trying to prompt her to see if she was going to mention, well, she should have done, because she should have come in to get her meds, and she should have come in to use the bathroom and do her makeup. And so I would have imagined that she would have come in to say goodbye before she left. Because surely when we look at this prosecutor's credentials, and when we look at the work that these detectives have done, surely that must have been a question. Why has Jen never mentioned this? But obviously they don't want to ask her that directly, because it could screw up further prosecution down the track.
All right, so do you fall back asleep?
I do.
And when do you wake up, and how do you wake up?
I wake up at like 9 o'clock in the morning to my alarm. Yeah, I wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning to my alarm. I get ready. I think at around 9:30, 9:45, I leave for my doctor's appointment.
Okay. So in this period of time from when you're waking up and getting ready, do you see anybody else in your home?
At this point, I'm not too sure. I know throughout the day I've seen my roommate in the kitchen cooking and doing her thing, but I don't recall if it was at this time.
So this part of the timeline is actually super important. But Jen doesn't know that, so I think it throws her for a loop. Because first of all, they want to know, when you wake up, how does that occur, that sort of thing. And she says, I'm woken up by my alarm. And then because all the questions up until that point have been pretty close questions, we just want this one answer. We don't want you to keep talking and keep going on with your whole big long narrative. There's this pause, and I think she's like, needs to fill the silence. So, and they let her this time continue. So then she talks about, well, I think at around 9:30 to 9:45 I leave for my doctor's appointment. Now, I don't know why she said doctor's appointment that time instead of blood work appointment. It could just be she's just trying to just get that bit over with. Sometimes we do generalise, so, instead of saying medical appointment, it could have just come out as doctor's appointment. I'm not overly concerned with that. We know that is actually how the timeline fits together there. She got up, I believe her phone was taken off the charger at 8 minutes past 9 and the alarm was turned off. Here we go. That'll be the pup ready to play. And I think she left at about 20 to 10 for her appointment. So she's actually been quite honest and accurate here with what she's saying. And he asks her, at this time, do you see anyone else in your home? Which throws her for another loop. She's probably thinking, trying to figure out why they're asking this, when she knows that Stefan wasn't there at that point in time. So you get this really long pause. At this point, I'm not too sure. And then she mentions basically seeing her roommate throughout the day, cooking and doing stuff like that, but she's not so sure if it's that time. I think in her mind, the "I'm not too sure" could well have been, "I'm not too sure why you're asking me about this period of time, because I've never said Stefan was there at this point in time." What they're doing, though, is making sure Stefan doesn't have an alibi for that period of time. Because we know full well that at this period of time, between when Jen got up and when she headed out to her appointment, is when he drove into that garage, drove up to the second level, opened the trunk of the Lincoln, opened the passenger door, and carried Maddie around and put her in the trunk of the car. So they just want to lock in place the fact that he was not there at that period of time, just in case the defence tries to come up with something like, "Oh no, how do you know that that is definitely him in that image? We don't know the quality of that image. We don't know what the defence is planning on doing." But it's just shoring up their timeline, essentially. As for her being unaware of what time of day she actually saw her flatmate, that actually doesn't surprise me in the least, for a few reasons. Firstly, from listening to the interviews with the flatmates, I really got the distinct impression that for them, the main emotional connection was with Maddie. And I suspect that Jen, being Jen, was probably typical spud and just sat in her room and probably didn't interact a great deal with the flatmates. So for her, she probably didn't even pay that much attention to whether they were there or not. The other reason that I say that it doesn't surprise me that much is that while I've said, yes, you know, when your child goes missing, every single minutiae in terms of people connected to it, in terms of your child, all that stuff, your brain works through all that continually until it's actually put together a solid, picture of that. Meaning that you do recall so much important stuff relating to your child, relating to anyone who may have been involved with your child's disappearance. So while she probably has this perfect image in her mind of what occurred the night before Maddie went missing, what occurred during the day that Maddie went missing, with regards to her and Stefan, because the flatmates didn't really have any part in that, her brain has probably just disregarded anything to do with them and homed in on the important parts. So there's no need for her brain to actually remember that part of the day, if hypothetically she knew nothing about Maddie going missing, in which case she's not going to remember when it was that she saw the flatmate. And of course, on the flip side of that also, if her day is spent focusing in on covering up for Stefan, then she's probably only going to recall the occasions that she interacts with the flatmates when their presence jeopardises any chance of covering up what Stefan did, if that makes sense. So she could just be trying to establish the "I'm just so vague because of all the drugs I'm on permanently." But I think that genuinely she probably has no idea what time of day she saw that flatmate.
Did you see your daughter this morning on the 26th?
No.
Did you have any texts or phone calls or any other type of communication through any possible app on your phone? Like, "Hey mom, love you at school," whatever. Any communications from Madeline?
Anything from her? Nothing.
All right. How about from Stefan? By the time that you wake up at 9, any texts or communication from him? Maddie's dropped. I'm off to the game store or whatever he's doing.
No. I didn't hear back from Stefan until 10:20ish, and he had told me he left his phone at home that whole morning by accident. And I had asked him how the morning went, how was Maddie, and he let me know that this morning went great. We made great time. She got busy super quick. He was going to take her to McDonald's for breakfast, but she changed her mind. All she wanted to do was sleep in the car, so he let her sleep. He took her to school and dropped her off where he said he dropped her off, and that was it.
So obviously when the question arises in terms of if she'd had any communication with Maddie that day, we know the answer's going to be none. Because for starters, Maddie's phone had been very intentionally left behind at the townhouse, and obviously Maddie wasn't capable of sending messages while she was at school because she wasn't at school. And then they move on to asking her about communication with Stefan, and we get back to the same old story, but this time she makes it that she basically started off the conversation. So she says, I asked him how the morning went. How was Maddie? I guess that's kind of a reasonable thing to ask. How did your morning go? Did Maddie enjoy Macca's? But no, it's not did Maddie enjoy Macca's. How was Maddie? I mean, you are presuming your child has been dropped off at school with no problems. You haven't heard anything about your child being unwell or anything. So, I don't know. To me, I could go either way on that one. I think basically she's just come up with that on the spot because we've heard so many versions of what she said here. Most of the versions prior to this have basically been Stefan ringing her and him doing most of the talking. Although I think at one point she says, oh, did you still get McDonald's or something like that? So then she goes on to talk about what Stefan told her. And once again, it's almost verbatim. We made good time. She got busy super quick. She didn't want McDonald's. She just wanted to sleep, so he let her sleep. Now, you would think that given that it's been a 6-week period, given that she's had time to process the fact that this guy unalived her daughter, I would actually expect a more condensed version of this, or a version of this that is basically editorialized. In other words, he rang me with his story about making good time. Her actually expressing here that she knows that it was all a big lie now. But instead, she just repeats his words verbatim. Like, she has just got this so memorized, so stuck in her head, that the moment you get back to this timeline story, she just fits back into it like it's a comfy old shoe. The only difference you get here is that then she says, and dropped her off, or he said he dropped her off. That is the first bit of editorializing you get for that whole section. He said he dropped her off. Well, that whole bit, Jen, was a big fat lie. It's not just about he said he dropped her off. All of it is a big fat lie. But she got so caught up in basically sticking to the narrative that her brain checked out for a moment and forgot that actually everybody knows this is a lie. And then realised at the end. And then, of course, she finishes off with, and that was it. So, no other conversations about, well, okay, I'm just about to head out and go buy myself something from the vape store, or I went to the vape store, supposedly, and it was closed. It was just 8 minutes on the phone to say 2 sentences. Because they were on the phone to each other for 8 minutes at that point in time. There was a lot being said then, not just a conversation, supposedly, about the drop-off to school. It must have been really frustrating here for the attorneys to get this standard line from Jen, because on one hand, it's possible that part of that conversation that occurred between Jen and Stefan could be significant when it comes to prosecuting him. But on the other hand, they also, I believe, want to be able to prosecute Jen. So when she is being less than truthful in instances like this, they have to weigh up the benefits in terms of helping prosecute Stefan as opposed to the benefits of not pursuing it and using it at a later date when they want to prosecute her.
And you had a 10:15 appointment for a blood draw?
Yes.
And did you go anywhere else prior to getting to your appointment for your blood draw? Did you go directly there or not directly there? That's basically the question.
Oh, I went directly there.
All right. And after your blood draw, did you go directly back home?
Yes.
About what time did you get home?
Sometime between 11:15 and 11:30.
So I think it's worth noting that she doesn't offer up the information this time of her sitting in the car park prior to her appointment. Because she basically said that she waited in the car park before that appointment. And what's really interesting is that when you look at Jen and Stefan's timelines and you look at the data from the cell towers, there is a period of time when basically we can see that Stefan and Jen were pretty much in that one location where she was waiting to go get her blood draw. It may simply be that he was driving past at the time, but I still find it kind of interesting. Is any of this important? Who knows? We don't know what information they have. Because in terms of surveillance on Jen and everything like that, and data from her phone, the only things that have been released have, of course, been things that relate directly to Stefan's case. Now, we do know that aside from actually sitting in the car park for a period of time, that Jen didn't actually go anywhere else. She went from the townhouse to her appointment, sat in the car park for a period of time, went into her appointment, and then headed home. So we know that is factual. As for what time she got home, that would fit pretty closely, I believe. Okay, yeah, I've just double checked that. She returned home at 11:27.
Did you have any other appointments or doctor's appointments later in the day?
I was supposed to have had one, but I canceled it
When did you cancel it?
that same day
Why did you cancel it?
because it was a $350 Botox appointment that I didn't want to spend the money on. I changed my mind last second.
You know, it really, really bothers me that she cancelled this Botox appointment at the last second. Because, I mean, face it, Jen is a narcissist. Yeah, I can see her being a bit money hungry and deciding she didn't want to spend the money on an expense that might have been for somebody else. But I see her as the type who would justify in her head spending that sort of money on Botox and not think twice about it. So when she gives this excuse of it, her deciding not to because of the cost, I don't know, it just doesn't sit with me. Sure, maybe if she had it booked earlier and cancelled it a week earlier, like on the Friday or something, it wouldn't look quite so suspicious. But we know that there was a lot going on that day. So I can't help wondering if there was an important reason for Jean cancelling her Botox appointment other than just wanting to save money.
Okay. When you get home from your blood draw appointment, is there anybody else at your home?
When I get home from blood draw, yes, Stefan was home.
All right. And can you describe what he's wearing, what he's doing, his demeanor, what's going on?
I can't recall what he's wearing. It might be a red shirt with a graphic on it.
Okay.
He's sitting in my bedroom on my desk.
Prior to you getting there, he's in your room? Or is that where you guys go to talk?
That he was hanging out there in my room.
Okay.
My room is kind of like the general hangout spot.
Okay.
I walk into my room. He's sitting there on the computer chair. He's talking, acting normal, asking about the morning and how everything went. And
So here's the thing. Jen only left that apartment twice that day. The first time was to go for her blood draw. She went for the blood draw. She came straight home. The second time was when she supposedly went to collect Maddie from school. She went to the school. She faffed around for a while, ended up at Yolanda's office until they returned home sometime around 9 o'clock. The data seems to suggest that she actually did return to the townhouse around 6 p.m. But here's the thing. Each time she returned to the townhouse, Stefan wasn't there. The first time, when she returned from her blood work appointment, he was out at the vape store. The second time, they both pretty much arrived back at the townhouse at the same time. So here they are asking her if when she got back from her blood work appointment there was anyone home, and she's like, yes, Stefan was. And he's giving her a chance to go, hang on, no, he wasn't. He asks her, what was he wearing, what was he doing, what was his demeanour, what was going on? Basically, tap into not just what you can remember seeing, but in terms of demeanour, what were you sensing from him? Because, of course, sometimes memories are more about emotions, how we experience things emotionally. So he's giving her plenty of opportunities here to back out and say, actually, no, he wasn't there when I got back. But she doubles down. I can't recall what he was wearing. It might have been a red shirt with a graphic on it. He was sitting in my bedroom on my desk. Again, she's given another chance. This was prior to you getting there, or is that just where you guys go to talk? And she fumbles around a bit. I don't know what she was trying to say. There's a n and a th and a that. And then she's like, he was hanging out there in my room. She's quite clear that he was hanging out there in her room when she got from her blood work, back from her blood work. Here's the thing. He left, they have him on camera exiting through the main exit at 3 minutes past 11. At 22 minutes past 11, they have him entering the vape store, which is about a 15-20 minute drive away. 5 minutes after that, Jen finally returns. So she returned at 11:27 while Stefan was still out at the vape store. He actually did not return for pretty much another half hour. He's basically seen on camera coming back in through the entrance at 11:56, half an hour after Jen got home. She was at home for half an hour by herself before he got home. He was not sitting at a desk in her room. And the thing is, it's not like she went out several times during the day and is mixing up different times during the day. Because like I said, she only went out and came back twice. Neither of those times allow for this memory to exist. So I don't know why she has stuck to this story, because it's an outright lie. And they can prove that this is an outright lie. Now, I don't know if that means that the whole derivative immunity goes out the window, or if just parts of derivative immunity go out the window. But there is a definite lie here. Of course, she could try and claim, oh, that's just my memory, maybe I've got it confused with another day. But they've given her every opportunity to back down on that lie, and she's continued to push it.
That he let me know the errands that he ran that morning or what he was up to.
And what did he say he was up to?
He said he had dropped Maddie off at school and then afterwards went to a vape shop so he can buy vaping things.
Okay.
But that the store wasn't open, so he waited a long time for them to open. They never did. So he drove around, killed time, and then eventually made it back to my house at like 10:20.
So she's fallen back into the narrative yet again. Although I think she's forgotten that the afternoon is when he was supposedly running errands. Because she says, he let me know the errands that he ran that morning, or what he was up to. Because according to her and according to Stefan, all he did was drop Maddie off, go to the vape store, which was closed, even though actually he didn't go there that time. And then, according to Stefan, he just drove back to the townhouse. Jen is basically saying here, going on with the longer narrative of basically the dropping Maddie off, going to the vape store, and then he just drove around and killed time. Again, she's had 6 weeks to come to an understanding in her head of this narrative, meaning that it should now be coming out in her words, not just another verbatim recital of the story that they were both pushing. And to me, that is a little bit alarming. It's like she just cannot tell the truth about this morning. Yes, we know he went to a vape store, but he only went the once. And that was when he went back out again. Prior to Jen getting back from her appointment. But according to her, well, I think she's just got the timeline a little bit confused here, because she has forgot to mention the fact of him heading back out. And maybe that's intentional, because him heading back out basically means that he wasn't there when she returned. So maybe she's just being a little bit economic here. Let's not mention the second run to the vape store, because that's going to lead to questions of, hang on, if he was back at the apartment at 10:20, how did he get to the vape store and back before you got back from your appointment?
When later on, when I got home and he was home.
Later on, when I got home and he was home. She is really pushing this notion of him being at the townhouse when she got home. To me, this is not accidental. She's making sure to establish this as part of the timeline. Now, one thing that comes to mind with this, she knows that detectives have Stefan on camera in the morning putting things in the dumpster. I'm not sure if she knows that they also have him going to the dumpster at other times, because shortly before he left that second time that morning, he put more items in the dumpster. So he actually did 4 trips to the dumpster that day. And maybe by ignoring the fact that he wasn't there when she got home, maybe the intention here was to draw attention away from the fact that he'd gone to the dumpster again. Maybe there was a belief that they checked the cameras for the dumpster around that time in the morning because they knew that was around the time he left. And maybe the thought was, well, if he didn't leave at around 5 to 11, then they're not going to check the videos again and they're not going to see him dumping more stuff in the dumpster. I don't know, just a theory. I have no idea why she continues to push this notion of him being home when she got home. Because it's not possible for her to be confused about this.
We started discussing, or he started telling me that he was going to go back out to run a few more errands in a little bit down 192. And he gave me the name of a few stores that he might stop at. And I'm like, okay. I asked him if he wanted to meet me at my house by 2:30 so that we can go pick up Maddie from school together. And he said, yeah, he'll be back by 2:30. And I said, okay.
So was that the plan, to get her together, or was it ever discussed that he would get her alone?
The plan was for us to get her together.
Okay. All right. And so does he leave before you leave?
Actually, before this, while we were still discussing, while we were having the conversation in my room, he did mention at one point, while he was sitting there, that he had to reboot his phone. or that he had to update his phone. And what was it? He had to update his phone, so I told him, stop avoiding it, do it. Like, updates take a while, like, do it. And while he was updating his phone, he said, I don't know what I did, but I just factory reset my phone. And I said, that's weird, I didn't know that you could do that. He said, yeah, a button popped up and I pressed it and it just reset my entire phone. And I'm like, oh, that sucks.
So William J. has actually attempted to avoid the discussion of the phone reset here. He's steered her ahead to basically, does he leave before you in the afternoon? And she hijacks everything actually before this and starts talking about the phone. And she still gets muddled up in terms of what she's meant to say here, because she refers to him rebooting his phone and then corrects with updating phone. And honestly, I believe what she's done here is she's been trying so hard to make sure that she didn't say reset his phone that she forgot what she was trying to say in terms of, say, update. So it came out as reboot. Which, you know, generally when you reboot something, I don't know if you could see that as a factory reset, but it's certainly not the same as an update. You know, at the very least, when you reboot something, you are turning it off and restarting it, which is not what he was doing. So I think that there's a little bit of guilty leakage here, and that she was fully aware of what was going on, but I believe that the reason for bringing this up in this interview is to try and establish her own innocence. And it's concerning for her that they haven't actually questioned about it, because she doesn't want them to look at her. So then she goes on with the same old story, although now it's, I told him to stop avoiding it and do it. And when you think about it, that's probably something that was agreed upon later by the pair of them, because that way it's essentially saying that he hadn't actually planned to attempt to do this update on his phone. He merely mentioned that it needed to be done, and that he only did it because Jen told him to do so. Meaning that it wasn't actually a guilty action, it was just completely an accident, prompted by Jen, not by Stephen, so it couldn't have possibly been an intentional act of resetting his phone. So she's still essentially defending him. Whether it's just because she's slipped into the narrative and that's part of the narrative and so she's just sticking with it, or whether she is intentionally trying to defend him. Either way, it's basically intended to make it sound like, well, the factory reset was purely accidental. He wasn't even considering doing anything to his phone, and it was Jen's idea, not his. And then you get these ridiculous comments from her. He tells her his factory reset the phone, and she's like, oh, that's weird, I didn't know you could do that. So calmly. And then I did this, and that factory reset it. And she's like, well, that sucks. In this really sing-song tone. Seriously? If I was sitting there with someone and they were like, oh crap, I've just factory reset my phone. I certainly wouldn't be all calm about it. I'd be like, well, how the F could you possibly do that? You know, there would be derision in my tone. I would be questioning them in my tone because I'm not dumb enough to believe that anyone could accidentally factory reset their phone. And then when they explained to me how they did it, I wouldn't just be like, well, that sucks, funny. I would be more along the lines of, well, holy crap, what are you going to do now? You've just lost all your contacts, you've lost all your emails, you've lost all your apps, you've probably lost all your passwords. You are so screwed. But apparently it was almost worth brushing off, according to what Jen's saying. Now, it's interesting that after she's gone through all this whole portion of her narrative just gets ignored and we get the redirect. That to me suggests that they really don't want to discuss the factory reset in this interview, and they really don't want to discuss her role in the factory reset during this interview. This interview that is, of course, derivative immunity, where if she basically admits to something that they have not been able to come across themselves, she gets immunity.
So does he leave before you do to go do these errands he was telling you about?
Yes, he does leave.
Do you stay at home until it's time to go get Madeline?
Yes.
Do you hear anything from Stefan while he's out doing these errands?
No.
So 2:30 rolls around. Is Stefan back home yet?
No. At this point, I leave.
Do you try and call him or text him or communicate with him?
Yeah, I had been calling him like maybe starting 15 minutes before I was supposed to leave just to see where he was.
Did he answer?
No.
So, what's really interesting is that he's done this twice now. That is, he's tried to give her the opportunity through the questioning to mention Stefan leaving his phone at home. When he was asking her about the morning, he gave her a few leading questions, which would have given her the opportunity to say, no, I didn't hear from him because he left his phone at home, or something along those lines. And he's done the same thing here. He's asked her about Stefan leaving before her. He's asked her if there was any communication between them after Stefan left. And then even when he's talking about her leaving because Stefan wasn't back, and he asks her, did you try and ring him? The intention there is for her to say, well, yes, I tried to ring him, but there was no answer because he didn't take his phone. But instead, she just goes with, yeah, I tried to ring him, but he didn't answer the phone. But you don't get the follow-up question of, why didn't he answer that phone? Or were you aware that the phone was left behind at home? They've essentially established through their questioning that Stefan couldn't be contacted at those 2 periods of time when his phone was left behind, which will of course help with prosecuting him because it does coincide with him leaving his phone at home. But they've not pushed the issue in terms of looking at Jen's involvement in all this as far as her knowledge of the phone being left behind. So they're being very careful to keep all the questioning focused on just Stefan's movements and not anything that could implicate Jen.
I leave at 2:30. Around 10 minutes later, I get a phone call from him. And he said, "I'm so sorry. I left my phone at home again on accident. I was driving down 192 and my tire exploded or shredded. And I had to pull over into one of the plazas and change my tire." He said he hurt his thumb doing that. And that, he was late and didn't make it back on time for that reason.
All right.
Again, we have her reverting to the agreed narrative. Pretty much, well, she is quoting him. She's saying it like actually she's channeling him. She's saying it from his perspective. "I'm so sorry. I blew a tire, blah, blah, blah. I did this, I did that." Not saying, well, he rang me and said, sorry, he's late, but he had blown a tire and that held him up. And then she had to throw in the story about him hurting his hand and all that sort of stuff. So, again, all in Stefan's words, or all in basically the words that they both used, quoting as if she's reading from some sort of novel. "And then Fred said, well, I'm going to go to the shops now." Sorry, that was probably uncalled for. But, you know, that's the feel I get. It just feels like it is so contrived. And what we get here, though, is that I think she's starting to realise, I don't know if she's been worded up beforehand by this insurance lawyer, that, you know, they are looking at you in terms of you've said some things that weren't right, you need to be truthful, because towards the end of it, she does sort of back off a bit in terms of the verbatim narrative, and then goes back to it just being Jen telling the story. Or it could just be that she ran out of narrative and had to finish it somehow and just went, yeah, and, you know, he was late and didn't make it back in time for that reason. So it could just be that she's going through the narrative and she forgot that that's the point where you need to stop, and she was trying to figure out what to say next and maybe lost track. I don't know. But definitely, most of that was verbatim, all the stuff that we've heard before. Of course, in terms of what was being said there, I think the difference there is that she gives the impression, again, that she was like, she asked him, oh, do you want to come with me for this? So it was like supposedly a last minute thought, not planned. Do you want to come for a ride with me to go pick up Maddie? And yet he is apparently super apologetic. It's the, I'm so sorry. Well, I don't know. It seems to me that that's an overreaction. I can imagine just ringing up and going, look, I'm sorry. I'm late. I didn't make it. This is what happened. Not being like, oh, I'm so sorry. I've just ruined your entire day. Because at the end of the day, it didn't make any difference whether he was there. Well, hypothetically, it didn't make any difference whether he was there or not when she went to pick up Maddie. I think that they basically over-dramatised just to sell the story a bit more.
When you leave to go pick Madeline up at 2:30, do you take her phone with you?
I do.
And how is it that you come to get her phone to go with you?
At some point in the morning, I was organizing and putting things away, and I walked into her bedroom and I saw her phone on her dresser. And I just assumed, oh, she must have left it here while getting dressed and forgot it.
Geez, I'd love to know what it was that she was supposedly organising and putting away. Because apparently she didn't organise Maddie's pyjamas, or she would have known what Maddie was wearing the night before. And, well, the laundry hamper doesn't exactly look like anyone's done any organising or putting away of things. Doesn't look like she's done a load of washing at all, because there's clothes everywhere in the house. So I would be curious to know what was being organised and put away. The other thing there, and it could have just been maybe a distraction that we can't see because we're only hearing audio, or it could be that she forgot that part of the narrative, but she paused before she mentioned the location of Maddie's phone as being on the dresser. If you remember, in one of the interviews, she mentioned it was on her nightstand. So, I mean, it could just be, like I said, there could be just a distraction, a momentary pause. Maybe she needed to access a visual memory to see where the phone was. But honestly, that whole side of it does my head in. Because there is no evidence of her doing any sort of organising or putting things away that morning. Which means that there's no real reason for her to have gone into Maddie's fake room that morning, other than to collect Maddie's phone.
Okay. Was it on?
Yes.
And sometimes when you bump or move phones, the notification screen comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Did you happen to do that, and did you see if there was any incoming notifications that she had missed?
I hadn't seen any, no.
Okay.
So here's what's interesting with Maddie's phone. So Jen claims that she found it sometime during the morning while she was organising and putting in things away. And he asked her if the phone was turned on, and she said yes, it was. And then he asked her if she saw any notifications. Now, people have questioned that, and they're like, well, we know that Maddie's friend tried to contact her before school to find out where she was. I think she said she tried to ring her or message her or both. And people are questioning this and saying, well, how come Jen didn't see those? So here's what occurred with Maddie's phone prior to when Jen saw it. And I'm going to say saw it because she did not physically touch that phone until just before leaving to go to the car line. So that phone at 4 minutes past 7 was removed from the charger. There were close to 200 steps between then and 7:16, at which point in time it was turned off. So to me that suggests that the phone was taken downstairs by Stefan at that point, taken into Maddie's makeshift bedroom, and then it was turned off. And it wasn't turned on again until 10:55. Why is that significant? Because Jen wasn't in the townhouse at 10:55. So basically it was Stefan who turned that phone back on, and the phone didn't move again until Jen collected it to go and supposedly collect Maddie. So she's saying she found it during the morning while she was tidying up. Yet she didn't move it. She didn't pick it up and go, I'll put that in my bag and take it with me. Or put it in her own room so she would remember to take it with her to collect Maddie. Somehow it occurred to her just before leaving that this phone that she hadn't touched all day she would go and collect. So she picked it up and took it with her in her car to supposedly go and collect Maddie. So yes, she probably didn't see the notifications, because if your phone's been turned off, you turn it back on again, you're going to get all those notifications come up the moment you turn it back on. So it's possible that when she picked it up, the notifications didn't show. But the other thing is too, looking at Maddie's phone, it looks like it's probably a 14 upwards. Unless you pick that up with the phone sitting the right way up, then it's not going to activate. So it's also possible that she may have just picked it up without putting it upright and not seen any notifications. It's also possible that there were notifications, she saw them and ignored them because that wouldn't fit with their narrative. But as for the not actually touching the phone until she collected it to go and pick up Maddie, it just seems odd to me, because if it was such an issue for her with she saw this phone and Maddie had forgotten it, wouldn't you pick it up at that point in time and then put it somewhere visible to you or somewhere easily accessible to you? And maybe put it with your own phone so that you would remember it? Like, this story of her discovering it while she's tidying up and then taking it later for Maddie, it's just not quite right for me.
All right. So you go to school, and due to time constraints, like an NFL football game, we're going to kind of jump ahead a little bit. My understanding is that you want to be first in line, mm-hmm. and you have to get there early to do that, and I understand that.
Yeah.
She doesn't come out.
She doesn't know.
Did you call her phone?
I did.
Why did you do that?
Because I forgot I had it with me. I was like, where is she? Why isn't she out yet? So I start calling her phone, and then I start realizing I'm hearing vibrating, and then I look down, and I see her phone's with me. I'm like, oh.
Okay.
How am I going to get a hold of her? Because I'm the first in line. The cars behind me already have children. They're full. They're waiting for me to leave.
Okay.
So essentially, the phone was out of sight all day because she claims she found it in the morning. But she still remembered to collect it and take it with her to pick up Maddie. But then when she got there and was waiting for Maddie and Maddie didn't show up, she forgot that she had the phone. Okay. Kind of doesn't ring true to me, because for that phone to have been out of sight for her in Maddie's room all day, her knowing it was there, essentially what she's telling us here is that she must have kept reminding herself that the phone was there. It was supposedly significant enough for her that even though it was out of sight for the rest of the day, because presumably she only went into Maddie's room that one time, it was still significant enough for her to remember it and go in and collect it. But it wasn't significant enough for her to then subsequently remember that Maddie didn't have her phone and to ring Maddie's phone. Again, things just don't add up for me. Now, she's once again reverted to the well rehearsed narrative. And of course, we get the little chuckle over calling Maddie's phone because, oh, look at me, I did a silly thing. I forgot that I had it. But in all honesty, my thoughts are that the reason for that chuckle is more because if you go back through the interviews, I think it was with Detective Tagler, she's giving this whole narrative of waiting for Maddie and Maddie not coming out, and then she gives the story of, and then I tried to ring her phone, and whichever detective it was said to her, but didn't you say that Maddie forgot her phone or something like that? And Jen's like, oh yeah, that's right, and I heard it ringing. So in all honesty, it is quite possible that she's just added that bit of, I then tried to ring her phone, as a permanent part of her narrative to cover for her screw up in an earlier interview. And that's possibly why she's laughing. Either way, it's not hugely significant to the timeline, and it's not something that, if it is a lie, it's really going to make any difference in terms of prosecuting Jen. So let's just move on from that.
All right, so I'm going to kind of jump ahead. Did Madeline ever complain to you about believing that Stefan had taken her Christmas money?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Christmas money went missing, and we were both. I don't even know how to explain this. We had collected all of her envelopes with Christmas money and consolidated into one. I'll put all her money into one.
Yep.
And then I said, I will put this somewhere safe. And I thought I had put it in my nightstand. A few days later comes around, whatever. We start looking for it or asking for it or something like that, and we can't find it. We can't find it at all.
So let me just narrow it down. Did she accuse Stefan of taking it?
I'm not sure if she did directly. We both had the suspicion, but we're like, no, could he have? No, I don't think so. But I eventually found that money.
Okay, I was just going to, how did the mystery end? All right.
I'd love to know the origins of that story, because it's not something that has come out in any of the documents that have been released, any of the interviews that have been released. So all I can think of is that it may have been perhaps a text conversation between Maddie and Jen, or unless it's something that Jen has related to somebody or Maddie has related to somebody and that person has mentioned it in an interview that we've not heard. I don't know, but it's got me so curious, and I'd love to know what the importance was of bringing that up in this interview, because obviously it's got to have some significance. Of course, from the way Jen explains it, there's definitely a part of me that wonders if Jen may have, air quote, borrowed that money herself for something. And maybe Maddie has had a conversation on her phone with one of her friends about that in particular. And maybe when Maddie had brought it up with Jen, Jen had suggested that it was Stefan. Because she's a little bit giggly about the way she explains it. And for once, she's not judgmental towards Stefan. There's no added malice in there that you usually hear when there's stories relating to Stefan. It's all about, oh, it was just a little misunderstanding, you know, we counted the money, we put it all in an envelope, and I said I'll put it somewhere safe, and then it went missing, and then we found it later. So I can't help thinking that actually it is something that relates to Jen, and that maybe Like I said, maybe she borrowed the money. Maybe Maddie made a bit of a fuss and she had to put the money back, or maybe she was intending on putting the money back but got caught out beforehand. I don't know. But just the way she's telling it is different from what she would normally tell a Stefan story when it is suspected that Stefan has effed up on something.
So you just started this job at Disney Coronado Springs like a week or two earlier, is that right?
Yes.
And your sister and other family members would help with Maddie getting to school because of your job?
Yes, my mom and my sister, yes.
Okay. Why is it that now Stefan on February 26th is coming up to help as opposed to any of your family members helping getting Madeline to school?
I had asked for him to come and help me because I think I was working a lot of night shifts or like really late shifts, and I just wanted the opportunity to see Maddie, like, because I wanted to spend more time with my daughter throughout the week while I was working, versus had she had stayed at my mom's, I wouldn't have seen her all week.
Okay.
So that was just me wanting to see her and spend time with her.
Honestly, this woman completely does my head in. She wanted Stefan there so she could see her and spend time with her, as in spend time with Maddie. Yet she didn't bother getting out of bed the following morning to take Maddie to school or take Maddie for a special McDonald's breakfast. So it shows you just how desperate she was to spend time with Maddie. But let's backtrack to the beginning of that little segment. He asked her about why Stefan came. And you get the stalling. I had asked him to come and help me because, like, how long can you make because last for? I think I was working a lot of night shifts, or like really late shifts, and I just wanted the opportunity to see Maddie. So she thinks that's the reason why. And she thinks she was working a lot of late night shifts and late shifts, and she wanted to spend time with her because, you know, otherwise if she'd stayed with Yolanda, she wouldn't see her through the week. Or she wouldn't see her all week, actually, to be more specific. Which is a lie. Because Jen had told detectives she had Monday and Tuesday off. So that means that on the Wednesday, there's one of two scenarios. She's claiming this is because she had late shifts and late night shifts. So it could be the first scenario that she had to get to work early on Wednesday. It would probably be, based on what she's saying, the latter. On Wednesday, she had a late shift working. So realistically, that meant that Maddie probably would have just needed to stay with Yolanda Wednesday night, Thursday night, maybe Friday night. So, really? She's only missing out on 3 evenings at the most with Maddie. If she's so desperate, she could pick up Maddie early Saturday morning and spend the entire weekend with her. Or make arrangements around whatever her shifts were for that weekend. She has a family who, it sounds like, have been bending over backwards to help her out wherever they can with Maddie. And, well, here's a novel thought. we know that Juan was in town. He was staying with Stephanie. See, Juan's got his own van. And that upstairs room at Jen's place was empty. Obviously, it would have been difficult for Juan to have actually slept upstairs. I believe he has difficulties with walking, based on what we've seen. But even if he stayed at Stephanie's, and Jen asked him, could you be there for Maddie through the week when I've got to work? I think he would have jumped at the opportunity. I think he would have been more than happy to go and pick Maddie up from school and to have several hours of grandfather time with his granddaughter. And then he could either babysit Maddie at Jen's place if that's what she felt was necessary, or take Maddie back to Stephanie's place and then Jen could pick Maddie up on her way home. To me, it seems like the most logical arrangement, given that Juan used to be the one that took Maddie to school quite frequently. So it would have been just taking things up where they were left off before. And yet she claims that she wouldn't have seen Maddie at all through the week unless she got Stefan to come up and help her. And if it was about worrying about not seeing Maddie, why did he have to come on the Sunday night when she had 2 days off? It just makes me so wild hearing her say all this, because it's clearly not the truth. That's basically all it comes down to. Jen is definitely lying here. There's something else that we've not been told. Some other reason for having Stefan arrive on the Sunday. It's not like he was arriving for Maddie's birthday. Her birthday was 3 days earlier. So had it just been about being there on her birthday, he would have arrived 3 days earlier. Coincidentally, when Jen was actually working. He wasn't coming for Maddie's party because he never would have been invited for Maddie's party. So none of it adds up. And it makes me so angry that she's made this lie that makes it sound like she's a caring parent. Oh, I really, really wanted that extra time with Maddie. But you couldn't be bothered getting out of bed the morning after Maddie's birthday to take her for a nice McDonald's breakfast, which is what you recommended. I really, honestly, sometimes I just can't with this woman.
Did Madeline stay at your mom's house fairly frequently?
Every few weekends here and there, like just for the weekend kind of thing.
So like if she described it to her friends as like her second home and like kind of offer up it's better jacuzzi and pool, does that sound like that's the place?
Yes.
Where does Madeline sleep when she's over at your mom's?
She will sleep in bed with my mom.
Okay.
Here's where I'm confused. Because on one hand, Jen is here saying that Maddie basically just stays at Yolanda's every few weekends here and there. Just for the weekend. But we've heard other accounts of Jen's stepfather picking Maddie up after school on occasions. We've heard of basically Yolanda dropping Maddie off at school sometimes of a morning. Something about one of Maddie's friends mentioned that sometimes, like, Maddie's close by because her grandmother lives close by. So there's been references that make it sound that Maddie has stayed at Yolanda's through the week on a school night and then gone to school from Yolanda's place. And yet now here, Jen is saying sometimes just on weekends. Well, didn't she just also say that Maddie had spent most of the previous week at Yolanda's place? It's just a major contradiction. And the other thing that is a contradiction compared to what she said is she says that Maddie sleeps in the bed with Yolanda. She has said that in past interviews, but there was one interview where she also said essentially that Maddie has a room at Yolanda's, but then sometimes she will still sleep or she prefers to sleep with Yolanda. So, does she ever sleep in her own room at Yolanda's place? Or does she always share the bed with Yolanda? And the final question on that is, why did Jen throw in that big sigh when she said she'll sleep in bed with my mum? It was like, she will sleep, huge sigh, in bed with my mum. Is it something that she is resentful about? Perhaps Maddie had a better relationship with Yolanda than Jen, and she is actually jealous of Maddie sleeping in Yolanda's bed because they had a better relationship. Apparently it's acceptable for Maddie to sleep in Jen's bed, but I just get the impression that something about Maddie sleeping in Yolanda's bed, Jen wasn't so happy about. And all I can think of is that perhaps Yolanda and Maddie did have a better relationship than Jen and Maddie.
Did she ever have sleepovers? Like have friends come over and sleep over?
Slumber parties, no.
Did she ever go and attend any?
No.
Is there any particular reason? I mean, she's a 12-year-old girl on the cusp of being 13.
Yeah, I've been very uncomfortable with sleepovers just because I know what can happen. Anything can happen in a sleepover.
Well, then you can be the host house like we kind of were. You never hosted any sleepovers for her friends?
For her friends, no.
Did she ask about it?
Yeah, she did ask.
Was it probably a source of contention or arguments?
It was, I guess what was the source of argument is her and she wanted to really sleep over her best friend's house, and I just kept saying, no, you never know what could happen. I don't know the dad, I don't know the brother, I don't know anybody there. Like, I don't know what could happen to you. So, just afraid of her getting assaulted.
Okay.
So, it's interesting the way Jen plays around with the terminology there. We've heard her multiple times referring to Maddie having slumber parties with Stefan. So, the detective asks her, did she ever have sleepovers? And Jen says, slumber parties? No. Now, it's clear here that in her mind what she's referring to is specifically having friends come and sleep over. But it's interesting that with him mentioning sleepovers, she's differentiated and said slumber parties, no. And I think there's a bit of guilty leakage there. I think he's intentionally used the term sleepovers to differentiate between these supposed slumber parties that Maddie and Stefan were having and referring to sleepovers as friends sleeping over. Jen messes up and says slumber parties. So that's definitely the forefront of her mind. And when he asks her why not, we get anything can happen at a sleepover. So she's once again, I think she's conscious of the fact that things were happening at little slumber parties that were allowed in her house. So she's now reverted back to referring to sleepovers because she doesn't want to actually go down that rabbit hole of slumber parties between Maddie and Stefan. So it's just a bit of a confusing language swap around, but definitely it seems to me that she has intentionally gone from referring to slumber parties to referring to sleepovers to try and steer away from Maddie and Stefan's slumber parties. Because it wouldn't sound good to say anything can happen at a slumber party when you're saying that that's what your daughter and your ex-boyfriend were regularly doing. And then we get this most infuriating part. He asks her about, well, was this a source of contention between you? And Jen basically responds with, yes, because Maddie wanted to sleep at her best friend's place. And I wouldn't allow it because I don't know her dad, I don't know her brother, I don't know anybody there. Well, okay. When I think back to when I was Maddie's age, and I used to spend half my school holidays at my best friend's house. And she pretty much would spend half of her school holidays at my house. There was a bit of a swap around that used to occur because I lived in the suburbs. There were different ways for entertaining us where I lived, whereas she lived near the beach, different ways of entertaining us again. So, we'd start off at my place for a few days, and then we'd organise to go and sleep over at her place. Because then, we could go kayaking or go swimming or fishing or whatever. Our parents, our mothers, were pretty good friends because of the amount of time ferrying us back and forth between each other's houses. Our parents had multiple conversations because of how closely connected my best friend and I were. So Jen's saying that she doesn't know anybody at that house just blows my mind. Is this normal these days that your child has a best friend and you don't connect with their parents ever? Because I just don't understand that at all. And then she turns around and says that she's afraid of Maddie getting assaulted. It's got to be one of the most hypocritical things that we hear from Jen. Supposedly, she's so aware of all this that she won't let Maddie have a sleepover with her friend. And yet she suspected nothing every time she sent Maddie upstairs with Stearns. And she expects us to buy that? Now, just on an aside, yes, that ripping noise in the background, which I should have paid attention to, was the pup with one of my good shoes tearing it to shreds. The current count being now 1 bed sheet, 1 doona cover, 2 pairs of shoes, and a handmade ottoman. A rather expensive handmade ottoman. He's lucky that I love him.
Madeline do her own laundry?
Yeah.
Did she cook for herself?
I was teaching her how to make a few things, so I mean, yeah, she could, I guess.
So I'd be really curious to know at what age Maddie started doing her own laundry and whether it was her idea or Jen's idea. Had Maddie reached a point where perhaps she felt a little bit conscious in relating to stains and things? I hate saying it that way, but you know where I'm going with this. Or was Jen trying to create plausible deniability by having Maddie responsible for her own washing? Or is it just an innocent thing of, you're a teenager now, you can do your weight around the house and you can do your own washing? I know my cousin's daughter was doing her own laundry at around that age because, of course, this was a family of 3 kids and it was just making life a little bit easier for her mother to have at least one child who was capable of doing their own laundry. Otherwise, she would have spent her entire life doing laundry. But it is interesting because my experience of families with just one child, especially when the parent isn't working, is that usually they do a lot of the stuff around the house and the child's not expected to do too much. Just a thought. As for the cooking side of things, I just can't imagine Jen ever actually cooking. I can imagine her being the sort of person that just chucks in ready meals into the oven for Maddie. Here's dinner. I could imagine Maddie learning to cook from her grandmother, perhaps. But from Jen? Who knew?
What's her normal routine for getting ready for bed?
We give her her meds.
I'm sorry, take your time.
We get ready for bed. I'd give her her medication. She would get in the shower.
Take a long shower, I understand.
Like an hour plus, yeah.
Okay.
And she loved it. She'd get out, she'd get dressed, she'd let her hair towel dry for a while, and then she would brush it. We would watch some TV. She'd probably have a snack before bed as well.
Now, obviously, we can't see Jen to know what's really going on here. But I think that the fact that there is an actual delay here in terms of her giving this explanation, it is possible that she did actually become emotional. If she starts saying we give her her meds, and then you get this pause and they're like, take your time. Which goes back to the question of, is there something in this in relation to Maddie and medications? Is that specifically what triggered her? Something about Maddie's nighttime routine appears to have triggered her. She can't get beyond talking about Maddie's meds, which is interesting when you listen to the phone calls that we've got so far. One of the things from those that one of the takeaways from those was my thought that Stearns definitely seemed to be implying that there was something in the toxicology results that was significant. So this, paired with that comment, so Jen getting emotional the moment she starts about Maddie taking her meds, paired with the things that Stefan said, and then you throw in that reaction that Jen had every time she mentioned Maddie's asthma medication. And I think there's a bit of a story being told here. I think that in addition to strangulation, that Maddie may have been heavily drugged. And that could well be the explanation in terms of Jen not seeing Maddie on the Sunday night. Because I truly do not believe that Jen saw Maddie on the Sunday night. She's just too vague when she talks about that, and she gives far too many different explanations. So the way she explains Maddie's routine is that before she does anything else, she takes her meds. And then she spends over an hour showering, gets dressed, towel dries her hair, brushes her hair, and watches a bit of TV before bed, and maybe has a snack. We had this story from Stearns, which Jen tried out for size and then kind of discarded. But we had this story from Stearns about hearing Maddie singing and wanting to watch Sister Act with her. Is it possible that before Jen got home, that Stefan lured Maddie upstairs to watch Sister Act, that Stefan may have given Maddie additional medications, and that by the time Jen got home, Maddie was already knocked out on medications. And that's why Jen didn't see Maddie. Because we have this reference here for sometimes we watch TV. We have Stearns talking about Sister Act. We have Jen adopting that briefly at one point as part of the whole half-hour period of time. We watched a bit of Sister Act, but we didn't have enough time, or whatever it was she said. Quite often, stuff like this, there's always a little bit of truth hidden in there. So it certainly makes me wonder.
Okay. What were kind of her nighttime uniforms? I mean, everybody kind of has their pajamas, but they're not necessarily pajamas. What was her routine nightwear?
She really liked wearing shorts. So she had a few pajama outfits, but she really liked wearing shorts and baggy t-shirts.
Okay.
Now, obviously, this interview wasn't the right time to ask it, but it frustrates me that this is the first time they've homed in on what Maddie's regular nightwear was, and then Jen's given a description. The reason it frustrates me is because, as I've said before, Jen would have to know what night clothes Maddie was wearing that Sunday night. Because, as I said, they should be discarded somewhere. Of course, there's two things here that come to mind for me. First of all, we know that I believe Jen didn't see Maddie on the Sunday night, so She doesn't have a visual memory in terms of seeing Maddie in any night clothes. So, to me, the only way she could know what Maddie was wearing in terms of night clothes would be, like I said, to see them in the bathroom or on the floor in Maddie's room. But what if those night clothes were thrown out? What if they were the clothes that Maddie was wearing when it happened? And as opposed to washing them with everything else that got washed, they got thrown out by Stearns. The thing is, we have records of Stearns going to the dumpster 4 times. And yet, the information that we have is not the equivalent of 4 trips to the dumpster. So I think there were more things that have been thrown out, and that information's not been released. Could it be that that is because one of the things that was thrown out was Maddie's night clothes, and that has not been released for Maddie's protection because she's a minor? Or the other option is that Stearns washed those night clothes with everything else and they were dumped on Maddie's bed and put away by somebody. Because you would imagine that we would see them with that pile of washing that was dumped on Maddie's bed, and I believe that's what that pile is. But we don't. So were they put away for a reason? Did Jen put them away for a reason? Because I can't see Stearns bothering to do so. Is that what Jen was doing when she was tidying up? But that doesn't make sense because I believe that Stearns did the washing later in the day. But it just bugs me every time. All these references to Maddie's night clothes, and Jen's completely clueless. Like I said, even if she didn't see Maddie, or even if she couldn't remember, she should have seen those night clothes the next day. If she didn't, I want to know why not. If she saw them and she's avoiding mentioning them, I want to know why not. Is the I can't remember what she was wearing because there is no longer anything in that house that matches those clothes? Okay, so we're nearly up to the 2-hour mark, and they're moving on to talking about Maddie's morning routine here. I've got a lot to say about that as well, naturally. So this is a good spot to stop yet again. So on that note, thank you for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. And of course, please hit the like button and please leave a comment below. I look forward to reading your comments and I do my best to respond to as many as I can. I will say at this point in time that with the increased number of comments, plus a certain little Chihuahua pup who tends to chew fingers and demand attention the moment I sit down to try and answer comments, it is a bit harder for me to catch up with every comment. So I do prioritise members when I'm answering comments these days. That said, I really enjoy reading everyone's comments. I get a lot from reading your comments. I learn a lot, makes me think more, gives me more ideas, makes me question sometimes when I've perhaps interpreted things wrong. So definitely I'm looking forward to reading your comments. And on that note, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.
I've been